Welcome viewers. We bring to you today an interview with the Finance Minister Mr. P. Chidambaram, who presented his 8th budget yesterday. I'm told he equals the record of Morarji Desai, who also presented 8 budgets. Today we'll try to understand his budget in greater detail. Welcome to our show, Mr. Chidambaram. Can I start by asking you the big picture question or issue that you raised at the outset yesterday while presenting the budget, that current account deficit is a bigger worry for you. Can you just explain to us what steps budget takes and future policies will take to address it?
See, most people don't know much about the current account deficit. In fact, even people who know about the fiscal deficit plead ignorance about the current account deficit, because that does not show up in any budget documents. It's there on the Reserve Bank's books, it is there in the Finance Ministry's books, but not in the budget documents. In the long term, the only way you can address the current account deficit is by exports. A country must export in order to pay for its imports. If your exports fall behind imports, the deficit will increase. So what we have done is given a major thrust to manufacturing. The investment allowance that I've announced. If anyone invests over 100 crore, he can take an investment allowance of 15%. Now that should give a boost to manufacturing. And as manufacturing picks up and as manufactured goods are exported in greater volumes, the CAD will shrink. At the same time, on the services side, on the software, we have, based on the Rangachari report, we have done something. We will do more before the end of this month. So services exports also should go up. So in the long term, what we have done for exports and what we will do, as I said, when the foreign trade policy is announced by the Commerce Minister, that should bridge the current account deficit.
The budget also has taken measures, some of them are subtle, to discourage gold imports. So is that also a worry in the context of widening, in the short run, the widening current account deficit?
It is a worry, but it's not enough if only I worry. There is a passion in this country for gold. We don't produce an ounce of gold in this country. Every ounce of gold is imported. And if the import bill for gold, say, runs to $50 billion, that leaves a very big hole which is shown up in the current account deficit. So while I have done a bit to throw some sand in the wheels so that gold imports don't take place in large volumes, I'm afraid until the people of India decide that we will not import so much gold, that problem will remain. But I do hope that gold imports will decline.
Mr. Chidambaram, one reason which the economic survey cites for the sudden rise in gold imports, one of the reasons, is that small investors don't find other comparable financial products to invest in, partly, and partly they have also burned their hands in many financial products which were sold as safe, relatively risk-free, which you also referred to in some of your public pronouncements, like insurance products, ULIPs. Small investors seems to be slightly psychologically damaged today, if I may use that term. How do you bring that person back into the markets?
See, when gold prices are rising at such a rate, no other instrument can match gold prices. If you're looking for only return when gold prices are rising very rapidly, that's the only place people will invest. But that's not good for the country. If you want safe investments, there are a number of instruments. The Public Provident Fund gives you a very safe and handsome return. There are government bonds which give a return of about 8%. There are very solid companies which issue bonds which can give you a return of as much as even 9%. For I think people must keep the national interest in mind and not demand so much gold. And if the passion for gold, say, subsides, abates, I think we'll save a lot of money and a lot of grief on account of the current account deficit. But I agree with you that the fact that gold is a very safe investment, it doesn't require any KYC, there are no hassles in buying gold, people tend to invest in gold. But it is not good for the country.
Mr. Chidambaram, you came out with a clarification today in regard to investors from Mauritius, investing from Mauritius, the tax residency certificate, which created a bit of a storm yesterday, storm in a teacup as it turned out. Now, could you just explain to us as to what exactly is the assurance that you've given?
You see, this paragraph was there last year in the memorandum to the finance bill. This year they brought it into the finance bill, word for word. Not a word was added, not a word was chipped. But because it will come into the finance bill, perhaps there was a sense of concern. And people have read meanings into it which don't exist. But I agree that if two people read the same passage and come to diametrically opposite conclusions, then you can't blame the people. You can only blame the way the passage was worded. Maybe the language was a bit clumsy. It's quite clear to me, but maybe it's a little clumsy. So we clarified that. As far as resident status is concerned, the production of a tax residence certificate will be accepted as evidence of resident status. The income tax department will not go behind that certificate and question the resident status of the person. That's the clarification. I think it was always clear, but we have made it explicit now.
Okay. So, what is the response that you've got? The clarification was made some 2 hours ago. Is there...
Nothing. I think I clarified it yesterday at the media conference, and most people accepted what I clarified. And today I think the CBDT issued a formal statement incorporating what I said yesterday, that there is no intention to question the resident status of a person who produces a tax residency certificate from the other contracting country.
Okay. So this issue is settled?
Well, I think it is.
Now, coming back to some other bigger budget numbers, some people have commented that you've been a bit aggressive in projecting a revenue growth of 19%, if I'm not mistaken. So, how do you respond to that?
It's a very reasonable projection. In the current year, 2012-13, when the CSO says we will grow only at about 5%, the revised estimates on revenue show that revenues are growing at 16.7%. If a 5% GDP growth can give you 16.7% revenue growth, for next year we're projecting a GDP growth of between 6.1 and 6.7. Let's take an average of say 6.4 or 6.5.
Yeah, the budget actually, yeah.
That should give us 18% revenue growth. And then we have done some additional resource mobilization. I've said in the budget speech that we will get 18,000 crore by virtue of the direct taxes and indirect taxes changes. So that will give you another 1%. So 19% is quite reasonable assumption of the growth rate of revenues. Why should anyone doubt it?
And on the expenditure side, I mean, I get the feeling that you, on the face of it, you projected a fairly robust expenditure growth, but it seems you could have a cushion there also. You've done some conservative accounting. Maybe you may not spend the entire lot. I mean, you could save 1 or 2%.
Well, actually, spending too much is bad, but not spending enough is also bad. Because government expenditure boosts aggregate demand, and aggregate demand is necessary to stimulate growth. Be that as it may. I have said plan expenditure will be 5,55,322 crore. Last year's BE was 5,21,000 crore. This year I put it as 5,55,000 crore, an increase of only 31,000 crore, which is necessary, which is perfectly justified. In the second year of the 12th plan, we cannot have a BE lower than last year's BE. Therefore, 521 to 555 is normal growth. On the non-plan side, there's nothing much anyone can do. We have to pay salaries, we have to pay pensions, we have to pay for defense, we have to pay for paramilitary forces, and we have to pay interest charges. These are all fixed. There's no room for manipulating these numbers. So all that a finance minister can do is look at the envelope for non-plan expenditure and say, well, that's costing us 11 lakh crore. Now let me go and find 11 lakh crore. But I think by and large, the non-plan expenditure determines itself. The plan expenditure, you have a little room for adjustment. But the assumption that we will spend 16 lakh crore is a completely fair assumption. I don't think we could have controlled expenditure anymore.
And you can say with a fair amount of certainty that going forward in the middle of the financial year, there won't be any supplementary expenditure.
That is a call we have to take.
Demands.
We'll have to take a call on whether ministries and departments are actually spending the money or they're going to save money. We'll have to take a call on people who overspend and people who underspend and decide. But at the moment, I'm not contemplating any supplementary demand except perhaps some technical supplementary demands.
Okay. And Mr. Chidambaram, you have budgeted for very robust capital receipts
Yes.
in the form of disinvestment proceeds, even in the form of sale of shares of private companies, SUTI.
Yes.
So you are confident that all these would fructify, say, over the next 7-8 months?
It's not very aggressive. On the 40,000 on pure disinvestment, I have lined up companies which are candidates for disinvestment. So we have looked at each company, spoken to the management, spoken to the ministry concerned, and confirmed that that company will be a candidate for disinvestment. All other things being equal. The market also must be friendly. So I'm assuming all that is equal. So the candidates which we have lined up for disinvestment will give us 40,000 crore. The other 14,000 crore comes from residual stake, which government has in non-government companies. This includes the SUTI companies. This includes a couple of other companies where government has a residual stake. Actually, if we sell all of that, we'll get much more. But we have said, conservatively, some of which will be sold, we can raise 14,000 crore from there. That's how I arrive at a number, and I think the number is quite realistic.
I've often wondered why these SUTI companies were not sold so far. Wasn't it always obvious?
No, it was not so obvious. And even now, we are not saying we're going to sell every one of them. There are some other considerations, some strategic considerations why we may not wish to sell them. We may not wish to sell them through a competitive bidding either. We might want to sell them to a restricted class of buyers like LIC or SBI or banks. So those are decisions which will be taken in course of time. But if we sell some of the SUTI plus non-government companies where we have a stake, I think we can raise 14,000 crore.
Okay. And you said subject to market conditions remaining reasonably good. Now, if for some reason market conditions do not allow for divesting the shares of PSUs, do you have a plan B, backup to reach 4.8 target, which everybody says that you're definitely going to meet?
I can't assume the worst. I mean, you can't have a cloud of misery hanging over your head. One has to assume that things will be normal. In a normal market, yes, we can raise 40,000 crore. But if something turns out to be abnormal, then surely we'll have to find other radical ways to contain expenditure. For example, in the current year, 12-13, we did adopt some radical measures to control expenditure. But I hope that that will not be necessary. The market will be normal, and we will be able to disinvest and raise 40,000 crore.
Okay. Because people do seem to have expressed faith in your ability to cut expenditure, which you did this year. Now, I just want to know, what is it that you do? Do you sit with all the ministry's expenditure items, and do you follow a certain method in item by item, looking at unspent money or money which need not be spent, and how do you go about it? I mean, it's just
See, there are well-established rules. If a ministry or a department does not spend 75% of its budget by December 31, it cannot spend more than 25% in the last quarter. So suppose a ministry spends only 65%. Then it can only spend 25% in the last quarter. 65 plus 25 is 90. There is a saving of 10%. And within the last quarter, out of the 25%, the last month, you cannot spend more than 10% or so. There's some number there. Therefore, these are well-established rules. See, because anyone in the month of March is not spending the money. He's parking the money. And we don't want government money to be parked in the hands of a vendor or a contractor or a supplier. Government money must remain with the government until it's actually spent. So if by, say, 28th of February, a ministry has got 3, 4, 5, 6,000 crores unspent, it's very unlikely it can spend the money in the month of March. So these rules are very clear. These are old rules. I didn't make these rules. I simply enforce these rules. Earlier, presumably, the rules were not enforced strictly. What I do is, if there is a rule, I enforce the rule.
So how do the ministries respond? We are told that sometimes you really have to sort of persuade them.
No, that's not right. There are some murmurs of protest, but when I explain to them, these are the rules, and we can't make any exceptions, most ministers understand. Because most ministers know that they can't spend the money in the month of February or March, and that their secretaries or officers will only park the money somewhere, and that is not good for the budget or good for the economy. So most ministers are understanding, and they say, all right, if that is the rule, that is the rule.
Mr. Chidambaram, you have now kept your side of the bargain by cutting the fares and by following the roadmap, as you said, suggested by Vijay Kelkar. There's credibility to your fiscal deficit reduction program. Now, when do we see a kind of complementing action from the RBI, from the other side, because to kickstart growth, we don't have time. So in the next 6 months, to get back to 6.4% as you projected in the budget, we need action from the other side. So are you in dialogue with the RBI governor, as you have been with other regulators?
Yes, I called the governor on the eve of the budget and shared with him the numbers. Then he has read the speech now. He must have seen the budget papers. The next monetary policy review will take place, I think, in March or April. The governor relies heavily upon the Monetary Policy Advisory Committee. So I'm sure they will take note of all that has happened in the budget and post-budget and take the right decision. I think the burden of stimulating growth falls more upon the government and less upon the central bank, but the central bank must also play its role. And I think reducing policy interest rates will certainly help in stimulating growth.
On the other hand, most analysts, they feel that if RBI reduces rates, and from this side, the fiscal authority or the government starts easing supply constraints, they could very well come together and push growth up. You mentioned in your budget that supply constraints are being eased. You mentioned the energy sector, the cabinet committee on the new committee on investment. You talked about that also. Could you give us a sense of how that committee will move forward and clear all the pending investment proposals already in the pipeline?
See, what is growth? Growth is made up of increased production of goods and services. If a country produces more coal, more steel, more fertilizer, more oil, if the country produces more software exports, that contributes to growth. Now, we've got hundreds of projects that are stalled. After investing thousands of crores, if a project is stalled, what is the use of that project? It doesn't produce anything. Therefore, the Cabinet Committee on Investment was constituted to look at all these cases where projects are stalled and guide the ministries to take decisions so that the projects will start moving. The committee has met twice, as I said in my speech. We have already cleared crucial oil and gas projects, a very crucial power project, some roads, all that has been cleared. And the Cabinet Committee on Investment is guiding the respective ministers, coal minister, oil minister, environment minister, and monitoring their processes so that the decisions are taken quickly. So I think the CCI is an important instrument, and next I think we're going to take up some oil projects, and we're going to take up some road projects in the next meeting of the committee.
And on the other reforms agenda, I mean, you've raised certain expectation that that you will reach out to the opposition parties and move on some of the legislative reforms agenda. There is a certain optimism in the market that the insurance bill, the finance, the other financial sector legislations would go through, that you are very close to clinching a deal, and that even on GST, you have really reached out to the various states. Can you give us an idea of how some of these big things will pan out over the next 3 months?
So we passed the banking bill and the SARFAESI bill in the last session through consultation with the opposition, the principal opposition party. So I'm following the same method. I have consulted the two leaders of the opposition on the insurance bill and the pension bill. I've spoken to the chairman of the standing committee on finance on the bills, and they have promised to come back to me. Maybe we will have another meeting early next week where they will give me their position. So we will continue to talk to them to find a common ground through which we can pass the insurance bill, following which the pension bill. On GST, I have revealed my cards. I've said I have nothing to hide. Here are the facts. GST requires a constitution amendment. They agree. GST requires a model GST law. They agree, and they are going to draft it. And GST requires an agreement on my part to pay compensation to the states which have suffered from the reduction in the central sales tax rate, which they of course agree. So once there is a consensus on these three issues, there is no reason why the GST constitution amendment and the GST bill cannot be finalized quickly, passed by Parliament and implemented. So I'm aiming at a conclusion of negotiations on GST, say by the end of May or June, so that we can move forward.
In the winter session?
No, once we if we reach a conclusion in June, we can even move forward in the monsoon session.
And the insurance and other legislation in the...
That I want passed in this session.
This session itself.
I've appealed to them to cooperate in passing the insurance and the pension bill in this session.
And what is the sense you get? Are people cooperating? I think negativity has come down substantially.
Well, from statements made by the principal opposition party, I'm inclined to conclude that they are willing to find a way to pass the bills. I believe a number of insurance people have also met with the opposition and impressed upon them the need to pass the bills. So I think it's in everybody's interest the bill is passed.
So you're hopeful that some of these bills will get passed in this session and the GST could come in the monsoon session.
That's my plan, that's my hope, but let's see how things turn out.
Thank you very much for talking
Thank
to
you.
us, Mr. Chidambaram. That was Finance Minister Mr. P. Chidambaram in an exclusive interview to DD News, where he unveiled his reforms agenda over the next 3 months. Thank you for watching.